Good morning and welcome to the 2021 Midwest Manure Summit. The Midwest Manure Summit is hosted by the University of Wisconsin Division of Extension and UW College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. I am Heather Slusser, agriculture educator with Extension Marathon County, and will be your moderator today. While many of you are familiar with our virtual presentations and the Zoom platform, I am going to go through a few housekeeping items for you. Please keep your microphones muted and videos off during the webinar. The mute and video controls are located on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Also, please feel free to type questions for our presenters into the chat box at any time. The chat button is located in the bottom center of your screen. We will answer as many questions as we can as time allows. You have received an interactive PDF document with today's agenda and associated Zoom links. To attend presentations in the different tracks, you will be joining and leaving various Zoom meetings. You are able to navigate between tracks by clicking on the provided links within the document or by following the links provided on the secure page on the Midwest Manure Summit website. The password to access the secure agenda is manure with a capital M. The link to the webpage and passwords are going to be posted in the chat box for you. When you want to leave a session, the Leave Meeting button can be found in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can leave and join sessions at any time. If you have any questions or difficulties with the Zoom technology, you can type your questions into the chat, or alternatively, you can email Jamie Patton, whose contact information is on the screen now. Lastly, before we get started today, I would like to thank our very generous financial sponsors. Our gold sponsors for this event include BioFirm, Compeer Financial, Dairy Business Association, Greenstone Farm Credit Services, the Journal of Nutrient Management, Oxbow, Profit Pro Ag, R. Braun Inc., Trident. Our silver sponsors include Investors Community Bank, L&L Sales and Services, and our bronze sponsors include Progressive Publishing and Reisterer and Schnell. Without their support, today's program would not have been possible. Several of our sponsors will be available to meet with you in our virtual trade show over the lunch hour. I encourage you to follow the provided links during our lunch break to see what products, services, and insight they have to offer. With that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Victor Zavala is an associate professor of chemical and biological engineering in the College of Engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Victor Zavala's research group specializes in the formulation of optimization and statistical models for control, estimation, and system design, and in the development of computational techniques to solve such models on high-performance computers. Applications of interest include infrastructure systems, energy systems, agricultural systems, supply chains, materials, and chemical production facilities. Dr. Zavala will be presenting systems modeling and optimization for organic waste management. Dr. Zavala, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Heather, and thank you everyone, to all participants for attending the talk. Real pleasure to be here. Very excited to be giving this talk. I want to thank all the organizers for inviting me. So today I want to tell you a little bit about the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years when I started working on this project related to systems modeling and optimization, specifically within the context of livestock waste, so manure, all right? So just full disclosure, things that I like to tell people right away. I am by no means an expert in the field. So I think that people in the participant list are the foremost experts in that area. And I'm very excited to talk to you about this. I am a systems engineer. So what does that mean? So systems engineering is a field of engineering that is about navigating very complex problems. So like manure management is one of them. My field is also about trying to find connections, try to find synergies, conflicts, objectives, and constraints that are preventing us from solving these complex problems. And at the end of the day, systems engineering is about the big picture. And as a result, we tend to sacrifice detail because of this. So it's always a back and forth between the experts and people in my field to try to refine our models and our conclusions. So that's kind of the full disclosure that I like to tell people right away, that I am not an expert in some of the topics, but I'm trying to integrate. And hopefully the goal of this talk is that we're going to be able to bring the community together to see how everyone fits together within this infrastructure problem that we have, manure management, to try to see how can we solve the problem as a community, right? So let me define this problem, and I'll define it from the perspective of systems engineering. I have explored many different types of infrastructure problems in the past: power grid, natural gas. So let me just tell you a little bit about how do I think about this problem. So I like to tell my students, give them this perspective, and these numbers probably are not a surprise to you, but I just wanna set the stage. So I like to ask my students, okay, so an average dairy cow, how many gallons of milk does it produce? And that's a number, right? Around 2,000 gallons per year of milk. And the students normally say, well, like, I want to translate that into something more tangible that gets me excited, right? And you put it in terms of ice cream and they get excited about that. So that's around 900 gallons per year of ice cream, okay? And I like to give them this perspective that the milk that a dairy cow is producing is enough to provide ice cream for 180 Americans, right? So a cow is a very valuable resource and very efficient system to produce products. But it also produces a lot of byproducts, right? So I think about these cows as a chemical reactor that is producing, let me just close this, that is producing products of interest, right, of high value, but also byproducts that we need to figure out a way to deal with. And for some of you, these numbers are, again, not surprising. So an average cow will produce 20 tons of manure per year. That's a lot. If you put it in the perspective of this ice cream production, right? So that's about 4 gallons of manure per gallon of ice cream. And that tells you the magnitude, right? The environmental impact of this. There are, as you know, we have around 1.2, 1.3 million cows in Wisconsin, 9 million of them in the United States. And now the important thing with manure, from a chemical engineering perspective, is that it is a pollutant, but it's also an opportunity, right? So it's a rich waste stream. So it contains nutrients. So we know that. Just in Wisconsin, you can do some quick calculations of how much phosphorus is embedded in this manure. And you can also get some basic calculation of how much methane you could potentially recover from this manure if you were to apply anaerobic digestion. And one of the numbers from the power grid perspective, because that's one of my areas of interest, is that if you were to convert all this methane to be recovered from manure, there will be enough electricity to provide 8 million homes in the state. And this is just Wisconsin, okay? So 8 million homes, right? Now, the secret, of course, is gonna be installing all those anaerobic digesters, which is gonna be part of the problem, all right? Now, I also want to emphasize the composition of this manure, and I think one of the numbers that I like to tell people is that 93% of this is water, and that's gonna be the complication. This is a wastewater stream. Okay, now, we have technologies for processing this manure, right, and recover valuable products from it. These technologies, some of them have been around for a long time, some of them are new, some of them are emerging, but we have different ways of doing it, right? Unfortunately, I think one of the things that I perceive in this problem is that the markets for these recovered products are still not very mature. There is a lot of uncertainty about yields, variability of manure, variability of different types of technologies. It's a complex waste stream, right? So it's not that easy to standardize. And as a result, I think this creates a lot of risk. It's just a lot of perceived risk and investment risk, and people don't like that, right? So as a result, I think that we still have quite few processing facilities deployed. So we don't have that many anaerobic digesters as we think, right, compared to the number of dairy farms. And this is precisely where we as a community want to move into, right? Now, from a systems engineering perspective, what I like to tell the experts in the field of manure management is that fundamentally the problem is that we do not have an infrastructure to manage wastewater that comes from manure, right? The manure is a wastewater stream. And if you compare this to our infrastructure for wastewater in cities, that's a different story, right? So we have a very well-defined infrastructure for that. So we have pipelines all over the place that transport this to wastewater facilities. Well, in agriculture, we don't have that because the geographical scales are huge, right? And as a result of that, we have lack of scalable solutions to deal with transportation issues. And that's a big issue that I think is fundamentally blocking us from solving some of these problems. So if we had the ability to move manure around, I think that we'll be able to find solutions more easily. Now, farm centralization is also a problem, and this is not unique to the dairy industry. This also has happened in the chemical industry. So I'm a chemical engineer and a systems engineer at the same time. So what happens with centralization is that, people and companies are looking for economies of scale. They're looking for automation, opportunities to integrate resources, and naturally that tends to consolidate operations, right? And we have some big concentration of animals in certain areas, as we know. And the problem with this is that, of course, this creates economies of scale. So this is great from a productivity standpoint, from a profitability standpoint, but at the same time, it tends to centralize the waste, right? And if you centralize all this waste, then the problem becomes even more complicated to deal with, because now you have to deal with this waste, and most of the time you cannot apply the manure locally close to the farms. So you need to figure out a way to transport it far away from the dairy farms. Okay, so this is another major factor. And so this is a typical map that you will find right on the internet of what has been happening with, specifically with phosphorus pollution, which is the problem that I'm going to be focusing on. And you see that precisely farm centralization is driving some big concentration of phosphorus in some areas. So this is not a surprise. And the issue here that I fundamentally think is a problem is that we worry about the quality of our lakes, and we worry about the quality of both the big lakes and the small lakes, right? So we want to protect all of them. It's not only that we care about Lake Mendota around Madison, but we also care about all these little lakes that several communities across the state are relying on. That is their source of recreation and water and things like that, right? So that's important to protect all of them. And that becomes a challenge, right? Because it's not that easy to balance phosphorus around in the state to try to solve all the problems for everyone. All right. So another part of the problem, and I don't expect you to kind of follow the entire diagram here, but if you want, just pay attention here to the main take-home message. We have done studies that try to figure out from a state level, where is the phosphorus going to? Where are we losing the phosphorus, and try to close this phosphorus balance. And one of the things that we have estimated, and there are several reports that coincide with this, is that around 60% of all the phosphorus that enters Wisconsin is going to be lost in the supply chain. And that supply chain involves multiple steps, right? So that means that our phosphorus usage is very inefficient, right? We're losing too much phosphorus to places that we don't know where it's actually going to. Or we might have an idea, but we cannot control it. And this becomes a problem because our sources of phosphorus are non-renewable, right? So the main source of phosphorus is phosphate rock, and this comes from mining. And in the United States, just to give you an idea, the only big sources of phosphate rock that we have are in Florida. Most of the phosphate rock comes from other places like Morocco, right? So this is a strategic problem for the United States. If we don't figure out a way to manage our phosphorus, then we're going to run into trouble at some point. So, and just give you a perspective, the Department of Defense is starting to think about phosphorus as being a critical component of our food supply system, right? So I think that also comes into play in this particular problem. Now, nutrient pollution is not unique to the Wisconsin, right? So we're just part of the problem. So here we are, right? We have Minnesota, we have other places, our neighbors, right, that are also struggling. And if you see here is that nutrient pollution is kind of concentrating around this middle part of the US, right? And if you could guess what is actually driving this concentration in that area, right, is the Mississippi River. So that is fundamentally one of the problems, that phosphorus is being leaked, not only to our lakes, but it's also going to watersheds, and this gets transported over multiple spatial scales. So what that means is that we're all in this together, right? So any problem that we generate in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, is propagating all the way down to Louisiana, Texas, different places around the country, right? And this creates a big national scale problem. Now, if you want to take it even one layer higher up, this is not only a problem of a national scale, but it's also an international scale. But I'm going to get into that in a second. But well, the other thing I just want to mention here is that phosphorus is one of the leading limiting nutrients in eutrophic water bodies, like lakes, right, in particular. I like to tell students this number in particular, which I found very staggering. If you were to take all the phosphorus that is embedded in the manure of a single cow, that will support the growth of 3,000 kilograms of algae per year. So that's 3 tons of algae per year. So you can grow a lot of algae by using this phosphorus. And now this is going to become also an opportunity maybe in the future, but for now, this is a problem that is creating eutrophication in different types of lakes. All right. All right, so this is what I was telling you, that this problem is not only unique to Wisconsin or to the US, but turns out that these nutrients are getting transported, very similar to greenhouse gas emissions, if you want to think about it that way, right? They're being transported down to the Gulf of Mexico, and then they're getting carried over, right, to different places. I am originally from Mexico, and I can tell you I follow the news in Mexico very closely. And this was an event that happened in Cancun, Mexico, which is one of the most beautiful places to go for vacation in Mexico. So you can tell the water quality there is awesome, right? It's a very nice place. And this was a sargassum bloom. So this was not an algae bloom, but it's a sargassum bloom that occurred in the area. So I can tell you that tanked the tourism economy in the area for a while. So this was a big issue. They had to bring the army, they had to bring multiple people from industry to try to collect all this sargassum, and that was a big issue. And recently it has been reported that these nutrients are getting carried over all the way to even Africa, right? So these are getting carried over through water streams in the ocean, all right? Now, the last slide to motivate the problem, and then I'll tell you what I think is the perspective of maybe how we can solve the problem. But it's important to realize that the dairy industry is not in this alone, right? So the dairy industry is an industrial sector that is interconnected with other sectors, right? So we are connected with urban communities through dairy products that are being driven by cities, right? We can supply biogas, right? We can provide electricity, and we can also try to compete with wastewater treatment infrastructure, because we have to deal with this phosphorus pollution from the manure. But turns out that wastewater treatment facilities also produce phosphorus, right? And they're trying to figure out ways to get rid of that phosphorus, maybe through agricultural application, right? So where all these sectors are in this together, and this is part of an opportunity, I think, because we can synergize with these sectors to try to identify new opportunities, but also make the problem a little complex and complicated to deal with, all right? So that's, in essence, the problem, the way I see it. So you might agree or disagree, but that's the way I think about it from an infrastructure perspective. And maybe my brain is a little biased because I have been thinking about these types of problems in a certain way. Now, so let me tell you a little bit about the tools that a systems engineer can provide to try to understand, first of all, and navigate this problem, and to try to give insight to the key stakeholders here, right? And we have many different stakeholders that are interested in this problem, right? So what we want is to develop tools that are flexible and can give insight to many people. Now, at this point, I'm going to show you a little bit of math. I hope that I don't overwhelm you. I'm going to try to walk you through the basic essence. If you see some mathematical equation, you can just close your eyes and just imagine that this is just for eye candy purposes, at least for me, because I'm into mathematics, right? But I just want to explain it from a very simple perspective. So fundamentally, this problem that I described, if you ask a mathematician or a systems engineer, is nothing but a supply chain modeling problem, okay? It's a supply chain design and modeling problem. So the idea here is that we have multiple geographical locations, which could be farms, could be city, could be anything you want, any location for a market player or a stakeholder. We have a collection of products, right? So we have the manure, and we have also potential products that can be recovered from manure, and there could be many, right? There could be many. We also have transportation links, and these links could be haulers, right? Transportations of manure, or could be pipelines of biogas, could be the power grid itself. We have sources of these products, for example, the dairy farms that are generating manure. Now, we also have consumers or sinks. So these could be people that buy these derived products, right? Like utilities are interested in buying biogas, electricity, right? Or fuels. And the important component, I think, of this problem that makes it really interesting are technologies. So technologies we have to precisely try to recover nutrients, try to recover biogas, any valuable product from manure, okay? So this is mathematically how the problem looks like. So do not worry too much about the symbols. So I'm just gonna walk you through through what it says, that the interpretation. Well, fundamentally what we want in this problem is we want to identify where do we place technologies, right? Because that's what we're lacking right now. We need to figure out where do we place technologies, and we want to place them in a way that we can satisfy the demands of the consumers, let's say of biogas, electricity, that we minimize supply costs, right? So try to find the best way to provide those products, minimize transportation costs, so we cannot move manure too far, right? Or if we're going to move it, it will probably have to be in some other derived form, like pellets, for example. And we also want to minimize processing costs, right? So we want technologies that are actually inexpensive, okay? And now, at the end of the day, we want to make all these decisions in a way that they balance all the products in the region, okay? So we want to balance biogas, manure, phosphorus, right? So the material balance has to close, okay? Now, these models that I'm showing you here, they look very innocent, but they're actually capable of dealing with a lot of very different number of technologies, different types of technologies, different types of stakeholders, players, anyone that you want. And they're very, very general models. I also like to tell people in general that this is the type of model that Amazon solves every day, every hour to deliver the products to your home. This is a supply chain problem, right? So they're thinking about the problem in exactly the same way. Like, where are the sources of products? Where are the consumers? How do I transport it in the most optimal way? But fundamentally, the main difference with Amazon is that Amazon doesn't have to deal with product transformation. I think that's one of the unique issues that we have here. We have a transformation of products from, let's say, manure to biogas, right? Or manure to some other derived product of interest. So our problem is even more complex, I'm going to say, that the one that Amazon has to solve, and the one of Amazon is already pretty complicated. Now, so how do you solve this problem? So what types of, more specifically, what insight can these models give you? Okay, so let me just tell you some idea of the things that we've been doing. So the first thing that I can do is to say, okay, let me hypothesize that I'm going to create an infrastructure in Wisconsin to produce different types of products from manure. And let's see how viable and not viable that is, right? So we have done studies that say, okay, let's try to produce electricity. So this manure is going to go to anaerobic digesters. We're going to produce electricity from there, okay? So the problem that we have found here is that the market value of electricity, which is provided by utilities, right, tends to be very low, right? And we have found that the break-even value for this infrastructure, so this is the price at which this infrastructure will become viable, is around four times higher, right? So this means that this is really not viable at those utility prices. Now, this is not the case in places like Germany, where the market value of electricity is much higher, right? So that's why we see more anaerobic digesters being installed in Germany and other places in the world. Now, we have done the same for biogas, and we still find a gap. Biomethane, liquefied biomethane to be used for transportation, right? And we've been exploring different types of products, especially struvite, which is one of the products of interest right now. Several technologies are looking into that, right? So now these numbers might not be or might be precise. Again, this is systems level models. We make a lot of assumptions on this. And this is the conversation that I want to start with people that are experts in these technologies, so that you can give us an idea if these numbers are realistic or we need to refine our models, and we're also happy to collaborate in any way we can, okay? But this is just to give you an idea of the types of insights that we can get out of this, okay? Now, but in general, I'm gonna say that from a systems perspective, what is gonna happen here is that we're always gonna find some level of gap here, hopefully not too large. And the reason for that is that these products that we're deriving from a waste stream tend to be more expensive than the ones that you can recover directly from non-renewable resources. Yeah, so this is where the EPA comes into play, right? So, or not only the EPA, but any regulator. So I think for them, the type of insight that they want out of these models we develop is to say, okay, great. So yeah, you're telling me these technologies are going to struggle, right? So we're going to need to provide some incentives to activate these markets. And once the market starts getting mature and the technologies become more efficient, probably we'll have to remove those incentives, right? So that's what you see here. So the EPA is interested in exploring different types of incentives, like renewable electricity incentives, RECs they call it, or RINs, which are incentives provided for biofuels, for example, liquefied biomethane. And the question for them is, what are the right incentive mechanisms? Are these the right incentives to be provided to biogas, liquefied biomethane? And also, are these incentives sufficient? So that's the type of questions that they might be interested in answering. Okay, now what we have done is also use these system models precisely to provide answers to the EPA like this, and this has been done in collaboration with them. And precisely we want to say, well, under the current incentives that we have, could we actually support an infrastructure for waste management? And we've been able to find some promising results that show that it might be possible, okay? So of course, these numbers have some level of uncertainty, but it might be possible to install, for example, technologies that produce, that perform anaerobic digestion, that filter, and that provide liquefied biomethane and provide some form of concentrated nutrient product, like a pellet, for example, and that also produce digestate to try to be used at different sources, right? So these studies seem to be promising. It tells you that incentives might be possible of driving this, but we still don't understand if these are the right incentives, so we need more incentives, right? But this is the type of insight that you can get out of these types of models. But now the next question is that when we solve these models, yeah, so they inform how the infrastructure might look like, and everything looks very fancy, right? But now the question is, who's gonna pay for this, right? So who's gonna install these facilities? It's not gonna be the EPA, right? It's gonna be some farmer that has to balance their profit in their own local markets, right? And they have a different business. And also, how are you gonna deploy these technologies? And also at the end of the day, who's gonna get the money out of this, right? So this is an infrastructure planning program, but then who gets the money from this? And that's an important question to try to answer, right? And this is where, at some point, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I got kind of stuck. I was like, okay, these models are really interesting. They can give interesting insight, like from an infrastructure planning perspective. But like there are many stakeholders here, and there are many people that are worried about their profits, right? And the impact that this is gonna have locally on on their budgets. So how do we think about this problem differently? Can we think about these supply chains as a market? Can we think about the supply chain as being an integrator of many different types of stakeholders, right? So this got me into this very obscure topic of coordinated markets, okay? And I hope that this is one of the key take-home message of the talk, that there might be an opportunity to create coordinated markets. And let me explain to you what those markets are and where I could see the opportunities happening, okay? Well, fundamentally, the idea would be to try to bring people together through coordinated markets. So let me go back to this ugly slide with a lot of math, right? So this is the supply chain model problem that I showed you before. So it's the same slide. But when I look at the mathematical form of this, turns out that there's another very similar problem besides Amazon that is solved every day, every 5 minutes actually. It's solved every 5 minutes to deliver electricity in the United States, okay? So it's a very similar type of problem, and is something that the power grid solves. So the way that the power grid works is fundamentally exactly the same problem. It's a supply chain type of problem. They're trying to maximize the demand served to the consumer, so they want to make sure that the consumers get their electricity, and they're trying to find the most efficient, right, the cheapest forms of supply, so the cheapest forms of power generation, right? And they balance power, right? So they balance power, so not a problem in the networks, and there's a big network. And they also have to satisfy some other constraints of capacity and things like that, but don't worry about that. But the star of the show here is these clearing prices. So when the power grid solves this problem, and they solve it every 5 minutes, they're trying to identify the prices that are gonna close demand and supply at different locations in the power grid, okay? So these are precisely the clearing prices. And they do it at different locations, okay? Now, this supply chain problem that they solve is actually what integrates all the stakeholders in the power grid, which are thousands. There are thousands of stakeholders here. You have power plants, which are the suppliers. You have utilities, which are the consumers of electricity. And you have the transportation people, which are the owners of the transmission lines. So you're literally talking about thousands and thousands of stakeholders that come together, provide bidding information to the market, and then there's a central entity called an ISO, Independent System Operator, that is gonna allocate electricity centrally, and is gonna provide the markets, the prices for the market. So this is kind of a concerted effort. And this is how we're capable of dealing with this really complicated monster, which is the power grid. So the way that the power grid works is that precisely all these stakeholders that are distributed across the network bid into the market. The ISO collects the bid, solves this supply chain problem, and allocates electricity and allocates prices. And this is the secret to enable efficiency and to enable access to resources in an efficient manner. Now, if I could tell you the story super quickly, because I don't have much time, this coordinated management of the power grid is actually something pretty new. I'm gonna say it's probably 17 years old. So before 2003, there was no coordination. So effectively, utilities, we will just have negotiations between themselves, power plant owners, utilities, and they will just enter negotiations. Some of them will own the entire system in a certain region. And there's some parts of the US that still operate like that. But what they found very quickly is that that was not a scalable way of dealing with this problem. There were too many interdependencies and too much complication in managing the grid. And at some point they gave up and said, you know what, we need to coordinate if we want to solve this problem, right? And in the US, what we do is that we break the United States in little regions where we're managing the power grid locally, right? So here in Wisconsin, we're part of something that is called the Mid-Continent ISO. So this is the entire footprint, right, of the power grid for the Mid-Continent. And the idea here is that centrally, this ISO is gonna manage all the stakeholders in this region, okay? So that's kind of an interesting story. All right, so let me just jump here directly. One of the beautiful things about the power grid is that it not only allocates power to consumers, but it generates these prices. And what is beautiful about these prices is that they not only give a very clear signal to consumers and suppliers of what is the actual value of electricity, but turns out that these prices also change over time. So at certain times, the power grid becomes congested, the network becomes saturated, or the demand goes very high up, and that's when the prices go up, right? And sometimes they come down, right? And that is a nice signal to send people, right, to enable a certain coordination, okay? Now, these prices not only change over time, but they also change over space. So there are parts of the power grid that are not as well connected, okay? And in 1 second, I'm gonna start making the analogy with manure management, okay? Because I'm gonna try to make the case that this is exactly the same type of analogy that we want to establish with waste management, okay? That we need prices that distribute in space and in time, okay? So I'll get into that in a second. But the key message that I want to send you here is that the ISO, well, the first message I just want to tell you is, very often when I give this talk, people ask me, this sounds a lot like socialism, right? It's like you're centralizing everything in a central entity that makes the decisions. And the answer is no. This is actually a competitive market, but it's coordinated, okay? So there's a coordination of bits that comes simultaneously, all right? And the benefit of doing this coordination is that you have a central entity that is maximizing the collective profit of everyone at the same time, okay? And the solution you can show that is a competition. It's actually a competitive market, is not a problem. It works exactly the same as any other competitive market, but the secret is that you achieve economic equilibrium much faster, okay? So this is really just a mechanism to accelerate. And just to give you an idea, there have been economists at Harvard and people that have worked on this problem for many years, and they have established all these properties for these markets, and this is why finally they happened in the US a few years ago. All right, so this is what we're trying to envision, right? So how about we create a similar type of market for a particular region, not necessarily the entire US at this point, but maybe just some local region, like let's say Wisconsin, and or other states, right? And where we bring people together. So all people are gonna bid into this market, transportation providers, suppliers, consumers, technology providers, and they're gonna say, okay, let us know where the manure should go. Let us know who's gonna transport it. Let us know how are we gonna transform it, and let us know where we're gonna be sending biogas and electricity, right? And this will be a really effective way of trying to kind of resolve conflicts more quickly, especially on the critical situations where, for example, the lakes are contaminated, right? So if at a particular point in time, let's say at a given month, we see a particular lake that is being polluted, then we need a mechanism that helps us resolve that type of contamination issue quickly. And we cannot rely just on stakeholder to stakeholder transactions for that, because this problem is integrated, right? So I think that this will be the idea with this. Now, the interesting framework of this, another interesting thing about this framework is that you can think about policy as entering as a stakeholder to incentivize this market, okay? And this is exactly what is done also in the power grid. So in the power grid, we also have policy that tries to intervene into the market to try to activate the market or try to create incentives for providing electricity in a reliable way, okay? All right, so I'll just get into this. So will something like this ever get traction? That's always a question that I always ask myself. And it seems that, yes, I mean, it seems that this idea of coordination has been discussed, right? And it has been discussed in some other context, not necessarily in the context I'm discussing, but for example, it has been discussed creating a centralized clearinghouse, right? That will figure out how to manage phosphorus facilities and farmers to trade between one another, because they realize that there are too many stakeholders here and that we need to work together to solve this problem, all right? So this is something that has been discussed and is not new, okay? I'm gonna skip these mathematical slides, of course, all right? So let me just now show you a few case studies, and I'll just conclude my talk with that, probably something more down to earth, like let's forget about the math. So let me just show you a few case studies that we have performed, just to give you an idea of what these capabilities can tell you, right? So we have this data set that kindly was provided to us by Becky Larson of the Upper Yahara watershed. So we have a number of animal farms in this region that are producing certain phosphorus contamination. We have potential land locations where you could apply the manure, or you could recover some of the products to other consumers. And what we want is to decide what types of technologies we want to install in this region and see how feasible would that be, and try to imagine that this will be done through a market. So we not only want to tell you where the technologies will be, but how much money would each person will be getting out of this, right? What is the piece of the pie do I get? So the technologies that we have explored are simple ones: solid liquid separation, granulation, struvite recovery, okay? And what you find right away when you solve the supply chain problem is that this market will not exist by itself, all right? The recovery of these products, especially, for example, pellets and struvite, will not be economically viable just by itself. You need some sort of incentive, like a phosphorus credit, okay? So that's precisely what the first incentive that you find. So that means that we need a way to activate this market. And this is where the policy and the environment comes into play. So here, the way we're thinking about the problem is we want to treat lakes as a stakeholder, right? And this stakeholder plays a very interesting role here. This stakeholder could say, you know what, I'm going to take your phosphorus if you want. You're going to be leaking it to me, but you're going to pay a price for it, right? I'm not just going to let you do it for the sake of it, right? So you're going to be using me as a storage of phosphorus, if you want to think about it that way, and it's going to cost you, right? So you can think about this cost as a value of service to society, or as a remediation cost that has to do with how impactful could be in terms of eutrophication to pollute these lakes, right? And this has been a topic that has been discussed recently, right? So for example, people in Toledo, they have experienced water pollution issues because of nutrient pollution. And at some point they discussed even making Lake Erie given personhood status, right? So what would that mean, right? I think that would be a really interesting solution to a lot of the problems that we have. But this is something that definitely has to be discussed. It's not as easy as it sounds. But again, this is just to give an idea of the types of insights that you can get out of it. So this region, the Upper Yahara watershed, right now what we have is we have an imbalance of phosphorus. So we have more phosphorus coming in than what we are actually taking in the crops. So that is creating the accumulation of phosphorus. So what we did was to run the model with no incentive provided by the environment or the policymaker. So $0 per kilogram of phosphorus. And you see that if this is business as usual, right? So we'll remain the same way that we are. If we increase this environmental cost to $45 per kilogram of phosphorus, all of a sudden we can balance the phosphorus in the region by installing these technologies, recovering the phosphorus, and moving the phosphorus outside the area of interest, okay? Now, what is interesting about this $45 here is that this is actually lower than the estimated cost of nutrient pollution. So we have done studies that estimate around $75 per kilogram of phosphorus in excess in the region. So that means that this is actually lower, which is good news, right? I'm gonna skip this slide. All right, so the last thing I wanna tell you in the talk is that we have also created some software tools that maybe people in the audience will be interested in exploring. And precisely this has been driven by the observation that there are many emerging technologies. So we cannot keep running studies, right? And we keep making these assumptions. And sometimes people say, well, those are not the right assumptions, right? So we want to provide the software tools so that people that actually own these technologies can actually make their own conclusions, right? So they can reach their own conclusions. So there are new technologies like water filtration. People are looking into microalgae growth, right, to recover phosphorus. People are also thinking about recovering fatty acids, which are super valuable in the chemical market from manure. So we want to kind of just provide tools that people can use to solve this problem. So the two tools that we have developed, one of them is Atom. So this is an advanced decision and modeling tool. So this is a supply chain modeling framework that precisely gives you some basic idea where different dairy farms are, where manure can be, what types of technologies you can install. We already have a database that we have populated, and it will give you the solution, right? And it will give you some basic insight into, is the supply chain viable? Who's gonna get the money out of this, right? So with this, we wanna kind of help people make their own decisions and reach their own conclusions. But I think another thing that we wanna do is, when I think about these systems problems, they also feel a lot like a video game. From my perspective, it feels like SimCity to me. So one of the things we've been doing is collaborating with a very talented group of people called the Field Day Lab. So we developed a video game that is called Lakeland, where precisely what we want to do is educate the public. We want to educate people about how nutrient pollution arises, what are the reasons for that, how do we solve the problem, and kids start quickly realizing through the video game that it is not as easy as it sounds, right? So this is not about demonizing people like, oh, these are people are to blame, or these people are the solution. No, it's more about just having them develop the ability to say, you know what, this nutrient pollution issue is not an accident, but it also has emerged because of our natural needs to grow products. And we need to figure out how to solve it, and it's a difficult problem, okay? So with that, I just wanna conclude just by saying that this is a waste management problem. It's a complex problem. We require scalable solutions. I think it's important that we come together to figure out these interdependencies of different stakeholders. We need to coordinate. We need economic and policy that is consistent and that captures these interconnections. I think there's a lot of need also about standardizing products like manure and technologies, and also ultimately just about bringing people together. So with that, I'm gonna just finish by thanking all my collaborators. As you can tell, this is a big project that we're involved in. In particular, Becky Larson has been an incredible collaborator over the years that has educated in this topic, and my students have also been very active part of this. So with that, I'm gonna stop, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Victor. We do have a couple of questions that have come in the chat, and I'll read them off for you. So, Victor, are you looking at other drivers besides phosphorus for market incentives? And then, do you want to start with that? Or it's a three-part question, so if you want, I can read it all. Yeah. Can we include other factors such as nitrogen or energy, or can we combine them?
Absolutely. That's an excellent question. I think that this is one of the reasons why we want to expand the boundary of the dairy industry to also account for interconnections with the energy sector and with other sectors, because the more drivers that we can take into account that can create those incentives, the more viable the solution would be. So absolutely, nitrogen, energy, all those incentives are going to become very valuable. For example, we have done a little bit of stories through ammonia emissions, for example. That's another one. So I think, yeah, absolutely. And the framework that we develop is general, so we can capture those types of drivers, but we haven't done it at this point yet. But absolutely, that would be an interesting thing to do.
Wonderful. All right, another question for you is, have you looked at the break even for milk price given the $75 per kilogram phosphorus?
Absolutely not. But we have started looking into creating alternative metrics to communicating the impact of phosphorus pollution to the public. And one of those metrics has been the impact on milk price. So we have slowly started going into that direction. So we have some very recent work that precisely tries to show that what will be the effective decrease in the milk price if you start installing this phosphorus technology, because someone will have to pay for this, right? So we have some basic analysis on this, but I cannot tell you like an absolute number at this point. This is work in progress, but I think that's an excellent question, that we want to do this in a way that we don't disrupt the dairy industry, right, significantly. So I think that's an important metric to consider.
Okay. Another question for you is, has ADAM been applied in other places besides Wisconsin?
Yeah, we have some case studies that we've been collecting data for Minnesota, and we have some data for Ohio. So we are slowly trying to build our database of different case studies. So yeah, and we have to make some assumptions in the different locations, but we do have some case studies.
Okay, sounds good. All right, that is all the questions that I see in the chat right now. But if you guys have other chat questions or other questions that you would like to ask Dr. Zavala, please feel free to enter those into the chat at this time. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Zavala, for a great presentation. We will be taking a break shortly to allow you to get to your chosen presentations either in track 1, 2, or 3. And to do this, you will need to leave this meeting and then select the topic from track 1, 2, or 3 for the 10:05 presentation slot that is appropriate, and click on that appropriate link. And if you are asked for a password, make sure you enter in that manure password, again with the capital M. All right, in track 1, we have Dr. Amy Schmidt discussing I Am Responsible and So Are You, agriculture's role in addressing antimicrobial resistance. In track 2, we have Dr. Robert Levine presenting on ammonia capture for the organic market. And in track 3, we have Dr. Mohammed Sahara on pelletizing manure solids. So again, don't leave now because there is one more question for Dr. Zavala, but when we get done, make sure you leave this meeting and click on the appropriate link to the session you would like to attend. So Dr. Zavala, another question came in and it says, shouldn't the price of phosphorus pollution to lakes be applied to soil test phosphorus rather than phosphorus in manure?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is where all the connections come into play, right? So it's not clear at what level the policy needs to intervene, at what level in that supply chain should intervene. So should this be intervene at the level of manure, or should be intervene at the level of agriculture, right? And this is why it's important to understand the boundary. Now, just to be clear, the way that we apply this phosphorus tax is not on the manure, it's on the disposal of phosphorus. So we are not penalizing directly the manure. We're just saying if there's some leak of manure for whatever reason in a particular area, someone will have to pay for that, right? So it's not like a direct intervention on manure. It's more like thinking about where is the phosphorus ending. But absolutely, that there are many alternatives here to apply it to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you again for attending today.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, everyone.